Paul Talbot, before we talk about your fascination with Charles Bronson, please tell us how COVID-19 has affected your life.
Okay, yeah, COVID-19 has affected my life. I've been fortunate. None of my family or close friends have been sick with it. They've all been really careful. And I've also been fortunate. I've been able to keep my day job. It's considered essential. So I've been fortunately not unemployed like a lot of people are. But I've been pretty trying to keep it safe. I go into work and I just go to work and come home. I try to go to the grocery store only every 3 weeks if possible. I try to eat everything on the shelf and not go to the grocery store until it's absolutely necessary. And then, of course, social life has been completely changed. My social life consists of walking my Boston Terrier in the woods, just the two of us. So, like I said, I've been really fortunate, like I said, to be able to keep my job and to be able to be healthy. So I'm very fortunate because I know a lot of people have lost their job and it's a very scary time. And of course, the worst case scenario is people have gotten very, very sick. So it's been a scary time, but I've been more fortunate than a lot of people. So I'm lucky.
Good. So, how much time have you spent researching Charles Bronson?
Oh wow, gee, who knows? I've been I grew up in the 1970s. So when I was a little boy in the 1970s, I became a Charles Bronson fan. So I've been sort of researching since then. But in terms of any severe research, I guess I started my first Bronson book was Bronson's Loose, The Making of the Death Wish films. That one was published in 2006, and I probably spent about 3 years before that of intense research. So if we're talking intense research, I guess we're talking since 2003, and it's now, of course, 2020, and I'm currently working on a couple Blu-ray commentary tracks. So that's what after we finish the phone call, the rest of my day today is going to be doing research for and putting together a commentary track.
Oh, well, this is a good warm up, I guess.
That's
So,
right.
tell me what the research consists of.
Sure. Okay. The most important thing about doing research is you try to get the story from the people who actually worked on the movie. Because, of course, I'm a
Mm.
Charles Bronson fanatic, but
Mm.
I'm not Charles Bronson. I didn't know Charles Bronson. I didn't work on any of his movies. So, of course, the story doesn't come from my head. I have to gather the pieces of the material and then put it together in a story to tell the story. So, most important research is I try to find people who are still around who either acted in the Charles Bronson films or worked on the films, of course, director, producer, writer, crew, something like that. And of course, sadly, as time goes on, there's not too many of those people left. I've been fortunate to be able to interview many the Charles Bronson people who work with him as actor or filmmakers for my books. Many of them have passed on since I've talked to them. But the most important thing is trying to get an interview with somebody. The next step is try to obtain any type of material from the actual production, trying to find like some call sheets, some schedules, screenplays, things like that. I'm always fascinated the most with screenplays. I'm fascinated with how a movie evolved, what the original idea was, and then how it changed over the screenplay drafts. And then, of course, how it changed during the editing of the film. They can change the film completely. And I do a lot of research in old newspapers. The internet is incredible now. I used to have to go to a physical library and find microfilm of old newspapers and scroll through that. Now, of course, I can just on my laptop. There's a lot of very valuable databases which have a lot of newspapers online. Of course, a lot of that's expensive. You have to subscribe to the database, but it's certainly worth it. The tremendous amount of material that's been archived out there.
So, who have you interviewed, collaborator wise?
Most importantly, when I was doing my first book, Bronson's Loose to Making the Death Wish films, when I
Mm.
started that book, I said, there's no point in doing this book if I don't get to interview Michael Winner, who, of
Yeah.
course, Michael Winner, who directed, co-produced, and co-wrote the first three Death Wish films. So he was probably the most important interview I ever got. I interviewed him for the first book, Michael Winner. He's an example of somebody who's passed on. So I'm very grateful that I was
Mm.
able to get the information from him before he passed on. And then let me see, different people. Dana Barron, who played his stepdaughter in Death Wish 4, not his stepdaughter, but his girlfriend's daughter. Brian Garfield, who wrote the original Death Wish novel. I interviewed him. He, again, has sadly passed on, so I was glad to get that information from him. Let's see what else. Many people. Pancho Coner, a producer who produced about 9 Bronson films. I interviewed him, so that's another important interview. And let me see what else. Bobby Roberts, one of the producers of the first Death Wish, also one of the producers of Death Wish 2. I interviewed him. He passed on. I got a lot of very valuable interview information from him. Also, one thing that's important when we interview people as film historians, it's important that we try to get not just like the major stars, the directors and stuff like that, but also people like screenwriters or producers, the ones that people really don't pay too much attention to. Those people often have a lot of very valuable information that isn't usually collected. So I guess probably overall, between the 2 books, I would say probably I've interviewed about 4 dozen people total for the 2 books I've written. 4 dozen people who've worked with Charles Bronson.
All right. So I would love for you to pitch why people should buy your books on Charles Bronson.
Okay. Sure. Okay. Well, there's all different types of film buffs. Some people love movies, spend their time watching movies, but they're not interested in what goes on behind the scenes, which is fine. It's kind of like food. I like to eat food, but I'm not into cooking. I don't care about how it's made. But for people like me who like movies and want to know what's behind the scenes, I like to pride myself on my stuff really isn't like, what do you call it? It's not like analysis. My stuff is really like telling the creation of a movie, how the idea first came from, how it evolved, what happened while it was being made, what happened when it was released, and how it's thought about today. Also, I try to tell the story about what was going on in society at the time, what was happening that influenced the movies that got made, and also what movies were popular at the time. What were people, the average public, going to see at that time? What did they go see that kind of like captured what was going on in the culture at the time? And also how the movies, how people look at the movies nowadays. I mean, that's what's always fascinating to me. Also, sometimes a movie will come out, be a huge critical hit, and be a huge hit at the box office, but several decades later, it's no longer considered people reevaluate it and don't like it as much, and people really don't revisit it as much. Whereas the opposite happens. Sometimes a movie comes out, gets bad reviews, or didn't do well at the box office, and now it's decades later, it's become like a huge cult classic. One thing that pops into my mind, the now classic movie The Thing by John Carpenter came out in the summer of 1982. When that came out, it was not a box office hit, it was not a critical hit. Now, of course, it's considered one of the great science fiction masterpieces of all time.
I get the sense that it's like you're not doing psychoanalysis of Buñuel's dream sequences. It's like a newspaper. It's like the reality of the situation, and not so much your analysis. More like more factual and taking you there.
Right, exactly. Yeah. What I try to put in, I put a little bit of a personal stamp, but mostly what I do, I tell the story behind the movie. I don't put my own analysis into it or something like that.
I think that upfrontness would definitely work for a Charles Bronson analysis. So, okay, so what are your? I know this might be maybe you get asked this question a lot, and it's superficial, but what are your top 5 Charles Bronson movies?
Oh boy, let's see. Right, when I say a Charles Bronson movie, of course, I mean the ones in which he was the star of the movie. I don't include ones like Magnificent Seven, which of course I love Magnificent Seven, but that of course he was just an ensemble in that one. In fact, even Once Upon a Time in the West, which I love, I don't really consider that one a Charles Bronson movie because that one again is more of a ensemble. So the ones I'll list a couple I like, and when I'm gonna as my favorite Charles Bronson movies, meaning the ones in which he plays the center figure. So I guess let's say you asked for the top 5. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's say the original Death Wish, The Mechanic,
Ooh.
Hard Times, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, that's 3. Mr. Majestic
Mm.
and Chateau's Land. Like I said, it's difficult for me to do that, but if I would say my top 5, it's those top 5. And then there's other ones that I like for different reasons. For example, if we're talking about his best performance, I would throw in the Valachi Papers. I love that movie too.
Mm-hmm.
It's a flawed movie, but in terms of one of Bronson's best performances, certainly his most challenging role, I would list it as that. But in terms of my top 5, would be the ones I just said. That's the original Death Wish, The Mechanic, Mr. Majestic, Hard Times, and Chateau's Land.
What's the one he did in Italy? Not Once Upon a Time in the West, but The Family or
Yeah, that's a good one too. That's called the actual, I guess, more official title is Violent City.
Right,
it was
right,
released
right, right.
released in the United States as The Family. Yeah, that's an Italian crime movie. That's what that one is. That's a good one too.
I'm a big fan of that one, and I'm a big fan of 10 to Midnight because I saw it at the Arrow Theater where they had the scene there. Oh, the killers
good.
at the movie theater. So seeing that at the Arrow Theater and being there, it's become like this surreal like top 5 Charles Bronson for me personally.
Good. Yeah, I love 10 to Midnight. In fact,
Yeah.
I would say in terms of the Bronson movies released in the 1980s,
Mm-hmm.
I'd have to think about it, but no, I don't have to think about it. I'll definitely say that. In terms of the Bronson movies of the 1980s, I would say 10 to Midnight is my favorite. And I saw that one in the theater when it first came out, and I loved
Cool.
that one. That was when it first came out. That was a good one because that one captured the 1980s. That's also a good one. I used to show that one on VHS to my fraternity brothers in college when it would have a big movie party. Everybody bring their girlfriends and things like that. So that one worked perfectly for a young audience of the 1980s. I did that one in my second book, Bronson's Loose Again, on the set with Charles Bronson. I did an extensive chapter on that. I talk about the making of that, how the script changes, and I did a lot of interviews of the producers on that one. I did an interview also with Gene Davis, who plays the killer. I got to interview him from that. I also worked on Shout Factory did a Blu-ray of 10 to Midnight, and I was one of the producers of that. I produced the interview featurettes that came on that, and I also did a commentary track. So 10 to Midnight is definitely my favorite Bronson of the 1980s.
Yeah, I've been meaning to pick up that disc, so maybe I'll pick it up soon. So I'm wondering, Once Upon a Time in the West, of course, is a classic. What the great follow-up to the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and Henry Fonda is the bad guy, and the big standout with Charles Bronson. It's incredible. But I always wondered, how did Charles Bronson end up in Italy? Why did he do a couple of Italian movies?
Yeah, the interesting story about that is Bronson, before he became a star in the 1960s, he had been around forever. His first movie was made in 1951, and he didn't become a star until the 1960s, probably around 1968 over in Italy. So we're talking a long career as a supporting actor. And he did do some low-budget films where he was the lead, but a long career as a supporting actor in films and television before he became a star. And the way that happened was, which was interesting, Sergio Leone actually offered Leone Spaghetti Western, A Fistful of Dollars, was offered to Charles Bronson, also offered to James Coburn. Bronson turned down A Fistful of Dollars because he didn't like the script. He didn't understand at the time that it wasn't about the script. It was about how it was going to be told. So Bronson actually turned down A Fistful of Dollars, and he turned down For a Few Dollars More, and he turned down The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Oof.
He finally went to Alain Delon, who starred in Farewell Friend. Alain Delon was a huge fan. Alain Delon was a legendary French movie star at the time. He was a fan of a movie called Machine Gun Kelly, a 1958 Roger Corman movie that Bronson starred in, and that movie got a huge cult following over in France. And Alain Delon had offered Bronson a movie earlier. I can't think of the name of it, but Bronson was doing something else, so Jack Palance got the part. I can't think of right now what the title is. But then when Alain Delon was doing Farewell Friend, he asked for Bronson to do it. So Bronson decided to go ahead and take that, and then he started doing the Italian films. That was popular at the time for some American actors, particularly American television actors, would get an offer to star in a film over in Europe. So they would do it, of course, for the money and also for a leading role. So Bronson did Farewell Friend, and then he also did Once Upon a Time in the West. By the time he got offered Once Upon a Time in the West, he had realized, of course, not only had the films become financially successful and had made Clint Eastwood into a superstar, but he realized that Leone, it wasn't so much about the script, it was about the way Leone was going to tell the story. So then Bronson did that. Then Bronson did Rider on the Rain, which was a French film, a thriller, which was a huge hit over in Italy. And then Bronson was offered the films like, as you said, The Family, also known as Violent City, and Cold Sweat, and Red Sun, which was a Western. And the interesting thing is, at that point, Bronson became like a huge star over in Europe, but those movies were pretty much ignored in the United States. For example, Once Upon a Time in the West was huge over in Europe. Paramount Pictures put it out in the United States, but they cut about 25 minutes out and just gave it a token release. And movies like Farewell Friend wasn't even released at all in the United States. And Rider in the Rain was just released mainly to the art house theaters. So it was so even though Bronson was a huge star, he was a huge star everywhere in the world except for the United States, his home country, in the early 70s. It wasn't until Death Wish, and Death Wish was released in the summer of 1974, which was one of the biggest hits of that year. But at that time, Bronson had not had a huge American box office success.
All right. So what are some other big roles that either he passed on besides Fistful of Dollars, but he either passed on or made the short list, but ultimately wasn't hired for?
Right. Let me see. One interesting thing was back around 1975, Tennessee Williams was writing a new play, and he wanted Bronson to star in that. And at the time, that was completely out of the question for Bronson to do a stage play. He was committed to so many movies. So that was kind of an interesting offer that Bronson got that didn't come through.
Okay, so let's move to Death Wish. So Death Wish, the first one, obviously, is a very intense movie, and sort of a almost similar to Dirty Harry. I think it's safe to say.
Right.
But then they progressively get more fun and more dumb. And I'm wondering who was behind that decision.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. That's why I wrote my book, Bronson's Loose to Making the Death Wish Films. That's why I wrote it, to find out what the hell happened to that series.
Right.
I had seen all the Death Wish films, of course, many times, but then it was probably like 10 years since I had watched them. So like one weekend I watched the original Death Wish, and I was blown away. I said, wow, I'd forgotten how good that movie was. Of course, I was older at the time, and you look at things differently. So I had a marathon. I watched Death Wish 2, 3, 4, and 5 in one weekend. I found them all. This is before any of them were on DVD. I had to go to like several VHS rental places to find it. So I watched 2, 3, 4, and 5 in a row, and I was like, what the hell is this? How the hell did we get from number 1 to number 5, especially since the first 3 were made by the same director, but a totally different film. So that's why I wanted to interview Michael Winner to find out the story behind all of them. So again, the original, a lot of people, when they watch the first Death Wish, it's interesting because some young people will watch the first Death Wish and they won't like it because it's not really an action movie. It's more like a dark psychological thriller. It's actually not until halfway through, 45 minutes into the film, before Bronson, as Paul Kersey, actually shoots somebody. So that first one is, I consider that original Death Wish one of the best films of the 1970s, certainly one of the most underrated. I put that on the level with things like Taxi Driver. You know, it's on that level of intensity. So interesting thing, the first Death Wish, of course, based on a novel, a very gritty novel. Producers for years tried to get it made. Different directors were attached. For example, Sidney Lumet wanted to make it, briefly was talking about making it. Major actors like Jack Lemmon, Walter Matthau, Henry Fonda, Gregory Peck. They were all offered or approached about playing the lead character. The producers couldn't get it made. Finally, they passed it on to Michael Winner, who was a producer as well as a director. He had done some work with Charles Bronson. He asked if Charles Bronson wanted to play it. Bronson said yes. Meanwhile, Michael Winner had done some work with the Italian producer Dino De Laurentiis. Dino De Laurentiis was looking for something to star Charles Bronson and something that could also be shot in New York City. Death Wish fit that mold. So that's how the original Death Wish got made. Very popular film, very popular at the box office. And again, this is back in the days when more, I guess let's use the word intelligent, more intelligent films were being made. People would go see a movie not just to see nonstop action, but also to think about it afterwards. Death Wish was a movie. Not only was it a popular movie in terms of making money, it was also a very discussed movie at the time. People would go see it and then discuss it in the office afterwards, like, he shouldn't have done that. There's no right taking the law into his own hands. Where other people are like, hey, if you've ever been mugged, you know what it's like. He had every right to go out there and do that. So they were originally, people wanted them to make a Death Wish 2. At the time, Charles Bronson, Dino De Laurentiis, Michael Winner were at the peak of their career. They didn't need to make a sequel. Also, this was before the era of sequels. Of course, nowadays, or at least since probably the mid-'80s, every single hit movie would automatically have a sequel. It would be unthinkable to not make a sequel. When they made the first Death Wish, sequels weren't that popular, so there wasn't a push to get one. Then we jump to 1981 or so. Michael Winner needs a hit. Charles Bronson needs a hit. So what happens is they go back to make a sequel to their most popular movie. Because after the original Death Wish, Bronson never had another blockbuster hit in the United States. Michael Winner never had another blockbuster hit in the United States. So they both needed a hit at the time. Bronson was reluctant to make Death Wish 2. But by this point, the sequel, the rights to Death Wish 2 had been bought by Cannon Films, a new American company that was bought by two Israeli cousins, the legendary Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. So Cannon wanted a hit, put Death Wish 2 together, offered Bronson a tremendous amount of money, and that's how Death Wish 2 got made. And Michael Winner, when he was making Death Wish 2, I think he didn't want to take any chances. He didn't want to rock the boat. He didn't want to do anything different or interesting. He said, let's have a definite hit. So it was made very, what's the word? It's a very black and white movie. It's very by the numbers. It's a standard revenge movie without any type of, not very much social commentary in it. So that's what Death Wish 2 is. And then, of course, Death Wish 3, when Michael Winner made that one, he just wanted to make it like a comic book, to make it crazy, to make it gung-ho, over the top. And again, he needed a big hit. And this was at the time when the big, huge action movies of Hollywood were just started. So that's how Death Wish 3 became just an insane, almost a comic book type movie.
Yeah, and then 4 and 5 are basically the same vein.
Exactly, yeah. And 4 and 5, of course, Michael Winner directed the first 3. He did not direct 4 and 5. 4 and 5 were directed by made by different directors. 4 and 5, again, were standard action movies, no real depth to them.
Paul Talbot, thank you very much for your time. Before I let you go, do you think there is a contemporary actor with a similar soulful grit that Charles Bronson had?
Let's see. Probably the closest we have is Jason Statham. He's kind of the stuff he's doing now is more huge Hollywood type stuff, like ensemble type stuff. But Jason Statham, I think, he's not as good as Bronson, but the early Jason Statham movies, I think the ones that he was making a while back, he's the closest we have, I think, to a modern Bronson.
All right, Paul. Well, thank you very much for your time.